Singapore will be working on a free trade agreement with the East African Community, or EAC. The move will potentially improve trade access and flows between Singapore and the regional bloc's 8 member states. It's one of the deals inked during President Tharman Shanmugaratnam's visit to Tanzania, one of the EAC's members. Nicolas Ng with more.
A grand welcome from the first Singaporean president to officially visit Tanzania. Yet behind the pomp of the state visit is the weight of uncertainty amid the global geopolitical system. It's to this backdrop that President Tharman Shanmugaratnam and President Samia Suluhu Hassan discussed ways to confront problems like intensifying climate pressures and to address reshaping supply chains and trade links. One of those solutions is the East African Community's intention to pursue a free trade agreement with Singapore.
It will be Singapore's first FTA negotiation with an African partner and the EAC's first with a partner outside of Africa. This FTA can improve market access and the flow of goods and services between the EAC and Singapore could provide East African exporters with a gateway to the larger ASEAN market. It will open up newer areas of growth, such as in the digital economy. And it will be a timely move to diversify our trade networks amidst current geopolitical tensions.
When it comes to just the two nations, President Suluhu Hassan invited Singapore to establish an embassy in Tanzania. Officials from both countries inked agreements to avoid double taxation and laid the foundation for future collaboration, such as foreign affairs ministries communicating with each other. They will also develop an agreement to transfer carbon credits from one country to another, like Singapore does with 11 countries, including the Philippines, Peru, and Vietnam. The Tanzanian Industry and Trade Ministry will also work with the Singapore Cooperation Enterprise to share expertise in industrial and trade development.
We can actually share our developmental experience and expertise, be it on the policies, be it on processes, systems, structures. And from there on, I think the whole idea is that then we figure out if there are opportunities for companies, Singapore companies, where they have actually helped Singapore's own developmental story in these areas. We can then bring them into the picture and see how they can actually work with the Tanzanian authorities or even the Tanzanian companies as well.
These areas could be in trade facilitation, market access, and industrial park planning. Nicolas Ng, CNA, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania.
And for more on the growing relationship between Singapore and Africa and the opportunities it presents for both sides, we're joined by Africa expert Amit Jain. He is the former director of the NTU SBF Centre for African Studies. Amit, good to have you with us.
Thank you.
So first of all, let's start with why President Tharman's visit to Tanzania is so significant, especially when consider the backdrop of Singapore's intention to work towards a free trade agreement with the other East African communities.
Oh, it signals a serious intent by Singapore to have a deeper and serious engagement, economic engagement with Africa in general, and particularly with East Africa. If you look at the different regional economic communities of the African continent, East Africa is perhaps the most integrated, most dynamic, and most diversified economic region. Over 300 million people, a very dynamic market, rich in minerals, agriculture, a very youthful population. So in the future, that could serve as Singapore's launchpad or gateway into the rest of the continent. And I think this exceptional free trade area agreement is the first time that Singapore has signed with any African, and we've done that with 8 African countries. That's exceptional.
Now, if you can go into specifics for us, why Tanzania and the East Africa region? What specific opportunities do they offer to Singapore businesses?
Sure. If you look at Tanzania, let's start with Tanzania first. It has been among the fastest growing economies in East Africa. Currently, 5.9% growth rate. Next year, it's supposed to be 6%. Its economy is pinned by a very strong services sector. Agriculture infrastructure has massively improved. It's rich in gas. Singapore had investments in its gas infrastructure as well. the Bagamoyo port and the special economic zone offer a lot of opportunities for Singapore firms to establish a footprint there, and it's a gateway to other large economies like DRC and Kenya, Uganda, and others.
That's a wide range of possibilities you've just laid out for us. Which of these do you think have the most potential for Singapore to capitalize on?
Well, currently already Singapore has exposure in hospitality, it has exposure in logistics, it has exposure in gas, as I just mentioned. Traditionally, the likes of Naman Boy and Sons have been involved in spice trade with East Africa through Tanzania. But more exciting opportunities really are in my view, in the fintech space, health tech. These are the two areas that will be most promising. With this agreement, I hope we can see a lot more nimble Singapore firms getting into that space. It's a very young and dynamic market. It has leapfrogged into the mobile digital world much faster. And I think there are some exciting opportunities there.
Yeah, let's delve a little bit deeper into that. How do you think East Africa would then fit into Singapore's AI and also digital economy ambitions here? You've mentioned some areas, fintech, health tech. What else is there?
Yeah, well, if you look at how Singapore positions itself, we could be exporting a blueprint for our AI governance models. The regulatory environment for artificial intelligence in a large part of Africa is patchy. There are only about 7 African countries that have laid out their AI policies. The challenges that they face, around AI are much the same as the many other Asian countries face, which is everything to do with security, data security, privacy, sovereignty, data sovereignty, the best practices, cross-border movement of data and information. This is where Singapore can come in with partners like the UNDP, try and create, some models, some training modules for policymakers in Africa that will allow them to harmonize and create a future-ready AI infrastructure.
Yeah, and speaking of future-ready, let's take a wider look now at global supply chains, especially given the current uncertainty around the Iran war. How important, especially now, is East Africa's natural gas reserves? You mentioned critical minerals is also a big strength of them, agricultural resources as well. How does all of that come into play when it comes to global supply chains?
Well, it is although it is in East Africa and it faces the Indian Ocean, it is the closest link to the continental Africa that Singapore has. It's also a little far away from the troubled part of the regions. Critical minerals play an absolutely a vital part in our global supply chain. Africa has something like 60 to 80% of all the platinum group of metals. Some of them up to 80%. And when we look at nickel, manganese, cobalt, copper, we rely on Africa for our daily products and services. And so this becomes very vital. All these areas become very vital when we talk about trade, its finance, and because Singapore is such a trade-dependent economy, this becomes very central to our strategic needs.
Amit, thank you for breaking all of that down for us. I've been speaking with Africa expert Amit Jain.